Hello, my name is Adrianna Guerra, and my topic for my final is about English language learners in the U.S. education system. All right, so to start off this recording, I want to kind of explain, what are English language learners? English language learners are anyone that their native language is not English. So it could be Japanese, it could be Chinese, it could be Spanish, it could be French, it could be the possibilities are endless. So anybody with their native language not being English in a US education system, which their primary language is English. So that's what an English language learner is. All right. And and they don't have to just have their native language be a different language. They have to be in the process of learning it. I mean, if they're fluent in English, then there wouldn't really be an English language learner because they'd already be fluent. All right. So now what do English language learners look like? Like before, they can look like anybody. They can look like anything, anybody. There's no definitive look of what an English language learner looks like. A lot of people make an assumption just because is of a minority ethnic group that they're English language learner, or you know what I mean. They have an image when someone says an English language learner. They have an image in their head, and that's a misconception because they can look like anybody. All right, so what's an English language learner class? An English language learner class is a class that is designed to help assist these students into the transition of learning their curriculum in a different language, that being English. So it's pretty much just like a transition class that helps them, thrive in the environment that is offered at these schools. All right. So, where are they located? Where are these programs located? These programs are located all across the United States, but they're more located, sorry, they're located everywhere. But the students in particular, as they're located everywhere as well, they're more in densely populated cities rather than rural areas. Rural areas do have English language learners as well, but there's a higher population in these dense cities. So that's something to think about. Okay, now before I get into the advantages, the disadvantages, the whole gist of English language learners in general, I'm going to be talking about a court case that had a great effect and left an impression on the education system today. So that case is the Lau versus Nichols case. A lot of people may have heard of it before. A lot of people haven't. So the Lau versus Nichols case was in 1974, and it was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court, where it was found that California school systems were in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by not giving adequate supplemental language instruction for English language learners. And by doing that, they're not giving a fair and just education. So the U.S. Supreme Court was in favor of Lau. So I kind of want to give a background on what inspired this case. It was based in San Francisco, and it was because there was around 1,800 Chinese students in the SF school districts that weren't receiving a fair and just education just because they were learning English. They were English language learners, and they weren't giving supplemental extra help. They were just kind of pushed out there, and a lot of them were struggling, and the school system wasn't doing anything about it. So one of the fathers, Lau, his daughter was in one of these programs, and she was struggling as well. And he thought it was unfair. They weren't receiving the fair and just education. So he took it to the courts, and the Supreme Court was in favor of him. All right. So that's just kind of a background on the case and what it is. And so this case in general, it inspired many ELL programs, and thousands of students across the United States have been affected, and they have benefited from these programs. And some of them, they had some issues, but we'll get into that. We'll get into the disadvantages, but the overall picture is that a lot of people benefited from it, and a lot of people were affected by it. So it's something to talk about. It's especially within the Asian American community. There's a lot of we're impacted by it as well as all the other communities as well. But The Asian American community has been affected by it. And that's what started the Blau versus Nichols case. It was the Asian American community, specifically the Chinese American community. So that's pretty cool to learn about. All right. So what are some advantages? Some advantages of ELL programs, and there's a lot more than what I'm going to list. I just named a few on the top of my head, just a handful. But there's so many advantages to these programs. But I will start off with one of the advantages being that children can get specialized attention and transition in the education system in a different language. So you kind of have to put yourself in these students' shoes. Learning curriculum is already hard within the school system. It's hard for many students. It's a challenge. You're learning something new curriculum, new concepts are being thrown at you. But on top of that, it's in a language you don't even understand completely, you're not fluent in. So that's why these programs are so important. That's why it's an advantage to have these programs so that they can get specialized attention and thrive in these programs and be able to, thrive in these programs and then be able to be fluent in English and not be able to rely on these programs anymore. It's just a stepping stool towards the bigger picture. Another advantage is that students may feel more comfortable alongside students with similar experiences as them. They may feel like nobody understands their struggle. They're going through something extremely difficult. And by being in these programs, they have a support system and they have other students that they can relate to, which may make them feel more comfortable and more confident in themselves, Okay. Another advantage is that the students won't learn in a sink or swim environment. Now, what's a sink or swim environment? Or what's sink or swim in general? What does that mean? Sink or swim is a concept that many school systems used to use in the past, where they kind of just threw curriculum and work at the students, just threw it at them and be like, well, if you don't understand it, if you're having a struggle, then you're going to sink. And if you get it, then you're going to swim. And, they didn't care. They're like, well, that's all up to the students, which the students have a part to play as well. But the students and the school system should be a unified effort into, these people's education. It should be a unified effort, not just all on the students. Everyone has a role in this, especially in young children. They don't understand the significance. These teachers should be taking the extra mile to help these students and, assist them when they don't necessarily get it fully and not just letting them sink. So that's another advantage, is that environment is no longer there. Okay. Now that I talked about the advantages, we also still need to talk about the disadvantages, because not everything is perfect and there's disadvantages to everything and they need to be addressed. So in the future, it can get better and better and improve more. So some of the disadvantages. Students may feel isolated from their peers. Now, being in these programs, although you get to socialize with, children that are, or students that are going through similar experiences as you, you're still isolated from the bigger group, especially in these rural cities where there's not a high population of, English language learner students. You may be in a smaller group and you feel isolated and oftentimes segregated from the bigger group. So that's a disadvantage. Another advantage is that some students and programs don't receive quality materials due to the minimal funding that they have. Now you might think, will they receive funding from the government? It was sorry, I'm blanking. It was initiated from, the Lau versus Nichols case. They should be receiving the funding. Well, if you look into it deeper, there's faults in that, because like I said earlier, cities, big, populated cities have a higher percentage of English language learners, and rural areas have a smaller percentage. So if the government's just giving out funding, they're not really giving out funding based on the percentage of students. They may try and attempt to, but at the end of the day, it's not enough based on the demand, especially in these cities. So a lot of cities have ELL programs that are not receiving enough funding for the amount of students they have. So that's a disadvantage. Okay. Another disadvantage is that many students are placed in these programs based on the assumption that they cannot fluently speak English based on their background or an accent. I mean, there is testing that goes into putting these programs, but a lot of students are just placed blindly. And I mean, it may not be like that often of an issue, but there's many incidences where that happens and it needs to be addressed, because what they're doing is they're putting someone that's already fluent in English in these programs, and it's holding them back from thriving at the pace they need to be at. They don't need the extra assistance if they already get it. Okay, so overall, there's a lot to improve about these programs. But at the end of the day, I believe that ELL programs are extremely beneficial, and they play a big role in these students' lives. They really help them. It's 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 not like optional. There needs to be programs like these. So I think that, although it's really beneficial, there is faults and that they need to be addressed so it could just get better from here on, because these children deserve a fair, just education, just as anyone else. It doesn't matter what language they speak, what their native language was. So that is my opinion. All right, so I'm not going to just give out all these disadvantages and not give you any ideas for improvement. So that's what I'm going to give right now. Here's some ideas. There's a lot more ideas out there that people can think of, and if you are watching this and you think of one, that's good, because then you're brainstorming on ways to improve these, communities, the Asian American community, the Hispanic community, the Black American community. There's so many communities that could benefit from these ideas of improvement, and if they're actually put in place. So the first one being hiring more bilingual ESL teachers for students in these highly populated cities. So that kind of directly comes from one of the disadvantages. And I think there needs to be a ratio. There needs to be more, they can't just throw out how many teachers that is the minimum, you know what I mean? The minimum. They need to put as many teachers as needed for these students. And a lot of times they're not getting the specialized attention. I mean, they're in their own specialized program, but are they really getting the specialized attention if there's so many students to one teacher? I don't know. So that's something to think about. Another idea for improvement is incorporating the English language learner classes and the regular classes together more. So I understand that there needs to be specialized attention. There's a time and place, but I think at least half of the time they should try to be incorporating the students together, because at the end of the day, there is still a language barrier between these two groups of students. It's already hard. There's already a barrier, there's already the language barrier. It's real. And I think that by incorporating these classes together, there can be less of a barrier, and I think there could be a lot of benefits to it at the end of the day. You feel less segregated from the group, you feel less isolated. And on top of that, you maybe meet friends with someone that fluently speaks English, and the person that fluently speaks English might meet someone that fluently speaks another native language, and they can learn from each other if they become friends. I think there's a lot of benefits to doing that, and I think it should be incorporated. Another idea for improvement is appreciating and embracing the students' native languages and cultures. So I think a lot of times these programs focus on purely just, transitioning them to speaking English. They're kind of sort of forgetting their native language and making them forget. And a lot of times that when they speak their native language in class, they might get in trouble or, be ridiculed. Oh, you're supposed to be speaking English. And it's in a way assimilating them to what they want them to be. I think there's a way to have these children learn English fluently in order to receive the curriculum, while also appreciating and embracing their culture. So I think that's an idea that can definitely improve these programs. Another idea for improvement is focusing on what techniques work best for the students and executing that. A lot of students work different, they learn differently, they work differently, and just by going by the books and teaching students how it's said by the books is not always going to work. They should train these teachers and these bilingual teachers to teach these kids in different ways, teach them different ways to teach you know, to get this curriculum across. Because, like I said before, the curriculum is already going to be challenging for them. And on top of that, learning language is challenging for them. So there needs to be multiple ways of teaching. Okay. Lastly, my idea for improvement is giving the students the same quality of materials. That should be the bare minimum. That shouldn't even be a question, because a lot of times they're not given the same quality materials. A lot of times they're given, the old books, or, they're giving only a certain amount of books. Not everyone's having their own. It's just, it's ridiculous. I think that should be the first thing they address at the end of the day. They need to be receiving the same quality materials, because they're both students of the U.S. education system. They're both going by the same district. They should be receiving the same thing, I believe. All right. So with all the districts putting more ideas in for improvement together, realizing their faults, realizing their strengths, I think if they focus on these things and always look for improvement, I believe that these English language learner classes and programs could only strengthen and get better from time on. And that's what we're striving for. We're striving for equity within these, for minority groups. That's what they deserve. It's their right. All right. So now that we discussed that, I kind of wanted to end it with part of my quote from my essay. It's not a quote by me. It's a quote by one of the Supreme Court justices, William O. Douglas. Just wanted to end it just so it can make you think about, it kind of ties everything together pretty much. All right. So here's the quote. Let me find it. Okay, here's a quote by Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas when he was in the Law versus Nichols case. There is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum. Students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. So, pretty much what William O. Douglas said is the gist of my final. It's pretty much, he says it there, like, but at the end of the day, we have to take a step back and see, are these students receiving the same textbooks? Are they receiving the same quality teachers? We're making steps towards improvement, but we have to really examine these programs. So although there's big steps towards, the end goal, we still need to look back. What was the goal of this court case being won? So I think that's a really important quote, something to think about. And at the end of the day, we want the English language learner students to receive equity, not equality. And I think that's a really big misconception that I think is the basis of most of these disadvantages, because if the ESL students are at this level of, thriving within the classroom because it's a new language and it's hard curriculum as it is, and the regular classes are right here, if you give them equality and you both give them an inch, there's still a gap. There's still a gap here. But if you give them equity, they could be at the same level, and that's what we're reaching towards. And that's what I hope that I kind of highlighted in this speech and in my essay. So pretty much that is my essay. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that I highlighted some of the key points. And yeah, thank you.